March 8, 1941. The North Atlantic, south of Iceland, 0500 hours. A convoy of 41 merchant ships is running westward in heavy seas, their holds packed with food, fuel, and war materials Britain cannot replace. Escorting them is a British destroyer, 22 years old, her turbines worn, her hull driving through swells that break green water over her forecastle. She has been at sea for 6 days. Ahead of her, running submerged on the convoy's track, is U-47, the most famous submarine in the Kriegsmarine. The boat that had penetrated Scapa Flow in October 1939, put 4 torpedoes into HMS Royal Oak, killed 833 British sailors in their anchorage, and surfaced to sail home past the Grand Fleet. Her commander, Kapitän Lieutenant Günther Prien, had sunk or damaged 31 ships totaling 200,533 gross tons in 16 months of combat. He was Germany's first U-boat commander to receive the Knight's Cross with oak leaves. The destroyer hunting him displaced 1,100 tons, made barely 25 knots on her best day, and carried depth charge equipment critics considered inadequate against a boat as fast and capable as the Type 6 IB. In the next 40 minutes, she would end U-47 and the career of Germany's most celebrated submarine commander with a single depth charge run. This is how an old destroyer found a U-boat that Germany believed was invincible. The strategic picture in the North Atlantic had reached its most dangerous point. Admiral Karl Donitz had concentrated his best commanders in wolfpack operations against Britain's Atlantic convoys, the arteries through which food, fuel, weapons, and raw materials flowed from North America. Without those convoys, Britain could not sustain the war. The autumn of 1940 had been catastrophic. In October alone, wolfpacks led by Prien, Kretschmer, and Schepke had sunk 32 ships totaling 154,000 tons in a period German submariners called the Happy Time. Royal Navy escort vessels were too few, too short-ranged, and too poorly equipped in ASDIC detection to close the gap. The Mid-Atlantic air cover gap, the Black Pit, left convoys unprotected for days at a time. By early 1941, the monthly shipping losses threatened to outpace replacement capacity entirely. The ships protecting convoys were overwhelmingly old, underpowered, and worked beyond every maintenance interval their peacetime schedules had imagined. To understand why, what HMS Wolverine did on the morning of March 8 mattered, you have to understand what she actually was, because on paper she represented everything that was wrong with Britain's convoy escort force, laid down at White's Shipyard in Southampton in 1918, and commissioned in October 1919. She was a W-class destroyer, one of 67 ships of the V and W classes built in the final years of the First World War. By 1941 she was 22 years old. Her 2 Parsons geared turbines, producing 27,000 shaft horsepower, had been running hard for 2 years of wartime service, with minimal refit time. Her design trial speed of 34 knots was a peacetime figure achieved on new machinery in calm water. By March 1941, her engineering department could reliably produce 25 to 27 knots in moderate conditions, less in the heavy North Atlantic swells that characterized winter convoy duty. Critics within the Admiralty's planning departments had argued repeatedly through 1940 and early 1941 that the V and W class destroyers were unsuitable for the convoy escort role. They were too large to be economical and too old to be reliable. Their fuel consumption at high speed made sustained pursuit operations tactically impractical. Their original armament of 4 4.7-inch guns and torpedo tubes was designed for fleet action, not submarine hunting, and the conversion to anti-submarine work had been partial and improvised. Wolverine had been fitted with ASDIC in the mid-1930s, the active sonar system that emitted acoustic pulses and received the echoes returned by submerged contacts. But her ASDIC dome was an earlier pattern than the equipment being fitted to newer escorts, and her depth charge outfit, while adequate on paper, required the ship to pass directly over a submerged contact to deliver an accurate attack pattern, a maneuver that exposed the equipment to its own blast. To the technical reviewers who wrote the staff papers, Wolverine and her sisters were a stopgap. The real solution was the Flower-class corvette and eventually the new River-class frigates. The V and W destroyers were filling a gap that better ships would eventually close. What those staff papers did not account for was what 4 years of convoy escort duty had done to the officers commanding those ships, and what 2 years of wartime Atlantic work had done to Wolverine's company in particular. Commander James Rowland had commanded Wolverine since 1940. He had crossed the Atlantic repeatedly in conditions that peacetime exercises never replicated. He understood how his ASDIC behaved in varying water temperature gradients, where sound propagation bent and where contacts vanished into thermal layers. He understood how his ship handled at low speed in heavy seas while tracking a contact, how to position her upwind of a diesel exhaust trace, How to read the pattern of a convoy's wake disturbance for the irregularity that suggested something running submerged beneath it. The technique was not in any manual. It was accumulated in the specific, punishing school of the North Atlantic in winter. If you're enjoying this look at how the Royal Navy's convoy escort force turned old ships and hard experience into a decisive capability, a quick subscribe helps the channel keep producing deep dives like this one. On the afternoon of March 7, 1941, convoy OB-293 was 300 miles south of Iceland, running on a westerly course at 8 knots. Wolverine was on the convoy's port quarter when her ASDIC operator reported a contact bearing green 40, range 900 yards, classified as submarine. The classification was immediate. The echo's characteristics, the Doppler shift in its return, and the contact's movement relative to the convoy track were consistent with a submerged Type 7 U-boat running at periscope depth on an attacking approach. Roland rang down for maximum revolutions and turned toward the contact. In the next 4 hours, he prosecuted an intermittent ASDIC contact across a water column, disturbed by the convoy's own propeller noise, a problem that no piece of equipment could fully solve. The contact was lost twice and reacquired twice. Prion had been among the most tactically sophisticated U-boat commanders in the fleet. U-47 maneuvered beneath the convoy's propeller noise to break contact, altered depth repeatedly, and used the thermal layer at 120 feet to degrade Wolverine's ASDIC returns. Roland held the search pattern through the night. At 0458 hours on March 8, Wolverine's ASDIC operator regained firm contact at 600 yards. The bearing was steady, the contact was not maneuvering. Roland ordered depth charges set to 100 and 150 feet, and brought the ship onto the attack run at 15 knots. The approach geometry had to be precise. An ASDIC contact was lost in the final 150 yards before the ship reached the target position, because the equipment's transmitting cone could not resolve contacts directly beneath the hull. The attack was therefore blind for its last 30 seconds, run on the bearing and speed calculation. Roland's plot had developed over the previous contact period. The depth charge throwers fired at Miro 507. A pattern of 5 charges fell across a 60-yard spread centered on the estimated contact position, set to detonate at 100, 100, 125, 150 and 150 feet. 3 seconds of silence. Then the detonations, each 300-pound charge of minol explosive creating an underwater shockwave that collapsed hull structures not designed to absorb it at close range. The sea lifted behind Wolverine in 5 successive white columns, then a different disturbance. A mass of air and oil broke the surface 40 yards off Wolverine's port quarter. Debris followed. Roland held the search pattern for 20 minutes. There was no further ASDIC contact. U-47 had ceased to exist. The assessment of what had happened became clear only later. Post-war analysis of German records, cross-referenced against Wolverine's attack plot, and the debris recovered from the surface, established that U-47 had been held at periscope depth by the need to maintain a firing solution on the convoy. When Roland's final attack run caught her before she could dive below the depth charge's lethal envelope, the 5 charges of Wolverine's single attack pattern had detonated within the lethal radius of the pressure hull. The boat had been lost with all 45 hands, including Prion. Germany announced nothing. Prion and U-47 simply ceased to appear in the operational returns. The disappearance was not confirmed publicly until after the war. Within the Kriegsmarine, the loss of Germany's most celebrated U-boat commander in mid-patrol, without distress signal or survivor, was a shock absorbed in silence. The tactical lesson Roland's attack demonstrated was specific and measurable. An ASDIC contact prosecuted over 4 hours through convoy noise interference, twice lost and twice reacquired, had produced a single-run attack accurate enough to destroy a Type 6IB submarine at the estimated contact position without any subsequent re-attack opportunity. The key variables were the contact prosecution time, which had developed an accurate plot of the U-boat's behavior at depth, the attack speed of 15 knots, which minimized the blind approach interval, and the 5-charge pattern spread, which compensated for the position uncertainty inherent in any ASDIC attack conducted through disturbed water. None of these elements had been invented by Wolverine's crew. All of them had been practiced and refined over 2 years of Atlantic convoy work by men who understood that their equipment's limitations could only be partially offset by the quality of the plot they built before the final run. The strategic consequence arrived in stages. 2 weeks after Wolverine sank U-47, HMS Vanek rammed and sank U-100, and HMS Walker depth-charged and sank U-99, capturing Korvettenkapitän Otto Kretschmer, Germany's highest-scoring submarine commander, along with his crew. 3 of the 6 most effective U-boat commanders Germany possessed were gone within a fortnight. Dönitz absorbed the losses and continued operations, but the period his crews had called the happy time was ending. The combination of improved convoy routing using signals intelligence, the extension of air cover gaps by long-range aircraft, and the accumulation of experienced escort commanders flying their trades-in ships, the Admiralty's staff papers had already condemned as inadequate, was changing the mathematics of the Atlantic campaign. By May 1943, when the Wolfpack campaign finally broke against convoy ONS 5's escorts, the tools that destroyed it were the refinements of techniques that commanders like Rowland had been developing on ships like Wolverine since 1939, the River-class frigates, and the Flower-class corvettes. The planners had correctly identified as the right equipment for the job were, by 1943, operating within a doctrine and a training structure that the old V&W-class destroyers had built and proven under fire. What the sinking of U-47 proved was not that Wolverine was an adequate escort destroyer by the standards of 1941. She was not. Her ASTIC was an earlier pattern than the equipment entering service in newer ships. Her speed margin over a surfaced U-boat was narrow enough that a night pursuit required careful fuel management. Her depth charge outfit required the ship to commit to a fixed attack course 30 seconds before the target position, a window in which a maneuvering U-boat could alter the geometry enough to survive. The critics who called the V&W class obsolete were measuring the right things. What they were not measuring was what happened when a crew that had spent 2 years learning to extract the maximum possible accuracy from limited equipment matched it against a U-boat that had stopped evading to take a firing position against the convoy. The old destroyer found Germany's most celebrated submarine commander in the moment when tactical necessity held him within reach of equipment that should not have been able to hold him at all. Critics had measured Wolverine's turbines and her ASTIC pattern. They had not measured what Commander Rowland had been accumulating across 4 hours of contact prosecution in a North Atlantic winter, or what it produced when he finally put his depth charges in the right place.